I've been using this car table with some MDF sheets on top as a workbench for years, and it's getting pretty beat up, and I really need to build a better workbench. But I haven't figured out the details yet, so I thought I'd work on another area of my garage. This area where my dust collector sits. My plan is to build this, a table with a bookshelf on top. A place where I can sketch out my ideas and check measurements. It does, however, have its own challenges in that I need access to these red knobs to clean the filters of the machine. There's this concrete lip where the wall and the floor meet next to it, and I need access to this shut-off switch in the back. Along with the many curves that the dust collector has, I had my work cut out for me. So like any project, I just started cutting wood. My plan was to build the first 3 legs of the table base, and then that 4th leg where the concrete lip was, I would worry about that a little later. Once my pieces were cut, I decided on a simple leg design by putting 2 pieces of wood together like this. I bought the domino joiner for this project and quickly found out that I didn't like it. Only because maybe I needed a little bit more time with it, a little bit more practice, but yeah. Once my pieces were joined together, I used a 3/4 roundover bit to round over the corners and then sanded everything smooth. I then brought it over to the dust collector to see how things were going to look, and at this point I decided to build this in sections, just to get a better, snugger fit. Once my leg pieces were in place, I attached a front and side stretcher to them, and then put a level to them to see if everything was level before attaching them. At this point, I totally forgot that my garage floor wasn't level, and so I found that I needed to attach shims to the bottom of these 2 legs. So after I found the thickness shims that I needed, I cut some pieces of wood and glued them to the bottom of each leg. I then used the glue trick to hide any seams that I had. Once that was fixed and I cut my stretcher pieces, I clamped them in place and then checked for level again before attaching them with pocket holes. I switched to pocket holes just because it was easier and faster, and I thought that maybe this would give me time to kind of figure out the domino joiner. Once I attached my side stretcher to the legs and then attached the front stretcher to that section, I brought it over to the dust collector to see if I actually had a snug fit and if everything was in place. And I did have a snug fit and everything was where it was supposed to be. Now moving on to that 4th leg. I first attached a side stretcher to the leg and then used another piece of wood as my 4th leg and butted up against that concrete lip. Once that was in place, I used a level to make sure everything was level before clamping the leg in place. I would go on to mark my cut lines, cut them, and then join them together with pocket holes. At this point, I decided to put another leg in the back of the table base as extra support, just because there was going to be a bookshelf on top of this, and I was worried about support issues. Once the table base was done, it was time to attach the tabletop to it, and I did this by using figure 8 fasteners. Once I had clamped everything in place, I lifted the table up and over the dust collector and then climbed underneath to attach it. Once that was in place, I used a flush trim bit to flush trim the tabletop to the table base, and I did this by going really slow and doing it by sections. Once the table was done, it was time to build the bookshelf, and this is where the domino joiner really helped out. The top board was a little bit more wonkier than the bottom, and I used a couple more dominoes, maybe too many, to align the two boards together. I did find out, however, after gluing them, that the seam between the two boards was a little uneven, and I'm not sure if that's just part of the domino joiner or if I need a little bit more practice. I then attached a front piece to each of the boards to mimic the legs. I then used a 3/4 roundover bit to round over the corners and then sanded everything smooth. I then brought it over to the table to see how everything was going to look and measure for my shelves. Because there's a bunch of things on the walls that I needed to avoid, each of the shelves wasn't going to be equal in distance to the next shelf, if that makes any sense. Once I had my measurements, it was time to cut my shelves. The shelves and the tabletop are both made out of 3/4 inch white oak plywood, and the rest of the build is made out of just plain white oak hardwood. I cut some strips of plywood to use as supports for the bottom of each shelf to lay on. And once I glue them and screw them in place, I would go on to attach the actual shelves using pocket holes. The last thing to do was to put a top on before I put some stain, and once I marked out where I needed to cut, I used a track saw to cut it roughly to length, giving myself maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch. I then would go on to attach it, use the fresh trim bit to flush trim each side, and then take it apart and then use the track saw to cut the middle piece, just because there was nowhere for the bearing to ride along in the middle of it. And then it was time for stain. I had some old toys in storage that I wanted to kind of incorporate into the bookshelf somehow. So I decided to build a display case using some leftover plywood and some plexiglass. I watched a couple of videos on how to glue plexiglass together because I had never done it before, and they all said to use as little glue as possible the first time around, and that if you needed more glue, to kind of do a second pass. I ended up using a lot of glue in the beginning, and it's not the worst, but it's not the best. I did have some kind of glue marks here and there, but it is a garage kind of workshop, so I'm not too worried about it. I don't like to see a lot of kind of tools laying around. I like them put away. And I also wanted to incorporate some more color into my workshop, so I bought some things to do that, and I really liked how it kind of turned out. And with that, this project is done, and I can turn my focus back to building a workbench that I really need. Thanks for watching.